everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is John and this is my very first video here. Today we're going to be making a HELLDIVERS B-01 tactical helmet. It's kind of the grunt helmet from HELLDIVERS. If you don't know what HELLDIVERS is, it's a video game that HELLDIVERS 2 just came out recently, and I've been putting way too many hours into it. It's basically Starship Troopers, the video game, and I can't get enough of it, so we got to do it some justice and put a helmet on the shelves here. A little background about me, since it is my first video. I've been doing 3D printing, prop making stuff for about a year and a half now, so not a super long time, but I feel like long enough to have a pretty good handle on it. I've learned some good tips and tricks, and I just hope to share a lot of that with you guys. So we'll take you through the full process, my full process anyway. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but we'll go through my full process with this particular build and get an awesome looking helmet at the end, and hopefully you guys can pick up some of that information as well. So we're gonna hop into the slicer settings here. I'll go through everything from slicer to finish, so you guys get the whole process. The files I'm using are from Galactic Armory. It was part of their February Patreon bundle, which I believe was like $15. You can also buy the files, I think, directly from their website. And there's also some free files for these type of helmets floating around somewhere on Thingiverse and Printables, Maker World, things like that as well. So let's get to it, guys. All right, so here we are in Orca Slicer. I have the file pulled up, and I've actually already had gone and sized it to myself. I believe by default these come sized for a 24-inch diameter head. My head's about 23.5 inches, so I sized it down to 97% instead of 100%. If you don't know how to do that, super easy. You just click on your file, you click this little scale button here, and you type in whatever percentage you want. You just have to make sure that you do that for each piece, otherwise they might not all fit together. Outside of that, this comes pre-plated and pre-supported pretty well. The default profile for this is actually for an X1C. I have a P1P, so I had to change that up here. Make sure that it works with my printer. Don't forget to change your bed type if you need to as well. I'm going to print this in a 0.16 layer height. Makes the details a little bit stronger, especially on areas like this cryo port back here and some of the vents up front. Everything else on this quality side is basically default. If we go to strength, the only thing I changed is they had it on a cubic pattern by default. I changed that to gyroid. I pretty much print everything in gyroid. It's a very good balance of strength, durability, and it doesn't add too much print time at all, if any. Everything else on here is default. Speed, I don't touch that at all. Support, enabled support, they have it default to tree auto supports. I actually had to change that to tree slim supports, and I just ignored this stuff here because it's going to try to take away your top interface walls, so I just put no on that. You want this top Z distance to be about 0.2 millimeters. That's basically the distance between the top of the support and the structure that it's supporting. So if you take that down to a 0, then you're basically fusing the support with the print itself. Not impossible to get off, it just takes a little bit more elbow grease to get off, and you might have to file some of those supports down because you're probably not going to get all of them off. So make sure that that's there. I don't know why it wouldn't fit on my build plate on the P1P when less going to tree slim, but that's what I printed on. It worked fine for me. Threshold angle I left at 30. Remove small overhangs was checked. Everything else on here I left at default. Another thing to note here at the dome is they do have it pre-painted for support. So if you click on it and you go to support painting, you can see that they've blocked out a big section of it here. They've also left a section of it here supported. So you are going to have a tree that builds in the middle here, and I think that that is because of kind of the flat nature of the top of the helmet here. A lot of times domes, like traditional domes, like a Daredevil helmet or an Iron Man helmet or something that has like an actual dome on top, you don't need to support the middle of it because it basically stair steps its way up. So you're not ever really printing on thin air. But because this one's kind of flat on top, I feel like that's why they left it in there. So I didn't mess with that. I didn't try to print it without it. I just left that in there as well. So if you slice that plate, this is what you get here. Everything looks good, nice and supported. So we're ready to move on to printing, and I'll see you guys in the garage for the first steps of processing. All right, hey, we're down in the garage now. I know it's a little bit different lighting. The acoustics might not be great, but it's kind of what I have to work with. So I also know that it is a little cluttered. Don't worry, I know pretty much where everything is, so it's fine. The prints came out really good. We have, this is that back piece here. You can see I haven't taken the supports or anything off yet. Kind of wanted to show you guys how it would come out, how it would print. These should be pretty easy to remove. Here's the visor piece here that kind of goes on the front, and not too bad there. And then we have the big dome piece, which pretty standard supports for that. This is that center support in there that I think again just helps that little flat spot kind of build up. We do get some good stair stepping that you can see in there that we'll have to smooth out to make this look really good, and that shouldn't be too hard to do at all. All right, so we got most of the supports off here. However, this little face piece here that goes over your mouth did have some supports that will just get stuck in these little grooves down in here. I'm gonna probably have to hit those with a metal file and just file them down because they are just glued on really, really hard. Other than that, everything else came off. Some little rough edges at the bottom where they were attached, to be expected. The back piece looks really good. Really no issues with that one. And then the dome looks great as well. Alright guys, so we're going to smooth down some of these edges here, these kind of rough ones that got through, and all I'm going to do with that is you just take a metal file. You can use sandpaper. Metal file just goes through a little bit quicker, and we just kind of drag it over to get those edges knocked down. Alright, all the big stuff has been knocked down. These are pretty smooth. They're going to need them with a little bit more sanding and probably a little bit of Bondo filler in some of these places just to make the bottom of the helmet really smooth. I feel like that's the part that a lot of people neglect, is they don't do the bottom, the underside. This will obviously be covered, but some of this stuff up by the visor is still going to be seen, so I want to make sure that that's nice and smooth as well. We'll get to that a little bit later, but metal file around the rough edges goes a long way. Alright, so we're ready for the next part here. You can see there's a little bit of a wardrobe change and a haircut. It got pretty cold here in the Midwest. I don't really like working in a 45-degree garage, and I never really know how spray paint's going to react in that, so took about a week break, and now we're ready to get back to it. The next big step is going to be smoothing out the print. While it was cold, I did go ahead and PLA weld it together. You can see some of those welding seams in through there. I'm really good at video recording, so I forgot to record how to do that, but I am going to show you guys why I do this and why it's very, very, very stable and how to get a really good result with that. It only takes a couple seconds. If you guys are really comfortable with PLA welding, feel free to skip this part, but I'm just going to go through it real quick with these two little calibration tabs, and I'm just going to weld those together and show you guys how that is done. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is you want to have your soldering iron turned on. I like the little bladed tip there. It gives you a good surface area to really get in there. And then you want to tape your tabs together, or tape your pieces together that you're going to be using so they're not sliding around on you. And all we're doing with this is we're just melting plastic on one side and then kind of pushing it over to the other side. So you don't really need to worry too much about this. It's pretty easy to do. You just want to make sure that you don't go super heavy-handed and push down really hard and push through it. These tabs are really thin, so they're about probably the thinnest thing that I've ever really done this on, and it's still pretty forgiving. And so it's just melting plastic on one side and kind of pushing it over to the other side. You can go back and forth, side to side. It doesn't really matter as long as you're just pushing melted plastic into that seam and kind of on the other side. You can then go back and try and smooth it out if you want, if you kind of care how it looks. And this is really good for if you're welding swords, anything, these bigger things that you really need to have some good structural integrity on. And you can see here that we have a pretty solid weld, not the prettiest thing in the world, but if you're doing this on like a sword or something that needs structural integrity, you just put a little Bondo or wood filler on there and you can smooth that right back out. But the reason we do this is it makes this very, very strong. I mean, these are not coming apart. I could bend it and snap it and make them come apart, but for the purposes of holding stuff together and fusing parts, this is a really, really easy way to do it. So we're ready to start smoothing the print down now, and there's a few ways to do this. I've done pretty much all of them, the Bondo acetone, just sand prime on repeat. The way that I like to do it, that I find is the fastest and most efficient for time to get those layer lines smooth, is using just some UV resin. This is just some Elegoo PLA gray. It bonds with the PLA helmet really well, and it just gets in there and smooths it really well. It is a more involved process because you do need more items to do this. You need the resin. I always encourage people to get some talcum powder, some actual talcum powder, because you kind of mix that in with the resin in the cup, and it helps the resin thicken up a little bit and helps fill those lines a little quicker. Then you also need a couple brushes or foam brushes, big spreader brush and a little detail brush so it doesn't pool up too much. And you need a spray bottle of isopropyl alcohol to wipe the resin off. Last but not least, you need some sort of UV light to cure the resin. So a lot of materials involved in this, but once you get everything set up and you have everything, it's actually a pretty quick process. And another thing also, resin is not really good for you to breathe or to get on your skin, so make sure you wear proper PPE while doing this. But the theme is pretty simple. You just kind of paint the resin on. It's self-leveling, it's a liquid, so it's going to fill in all those grooves pretty good. And I'll probably do about half the helmet at a time, cure it, do the other half, cure it, and then just kind of probably do 2 or 3 coats of that across the whole thing. And when applying this resin, remember it is UV activated, so do it in a room with no sunlight. If you're in a garage, don't crack the garage. If you're in a window or in your room, make sure that the shutters are closed or the blinds are closed, because any sunlight in there can start to cure the resin before it gets on the print, and worst case, it starts curing the resin in the bottle, and then you have to throw away the rest of the bottle. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pour the resin in, we're going to mix it up in our little cup. And this is roughly a 2-to-1 ratio. It's not really an exact science for this. Put the lid back on your resin bottle so you don't spill it. And then we're just kind of mixing that talcum powder in there. So while doing this resin brushing technique, you use the big brush obviously for the majority of the coverage. The little detail brush is basically to spread out the resin that's going to try to pool in these little corners and stuff, those little detail parts on the helmet. If you cure it while it's pulled up there, you're gonna have a thicker bit of resin. It's gonna be harder to sand out. It's not worth it. Just use a little detail brush. Sometimes you can use a toothpick or even a popsicle stick as well, just to get that little pooled resin out of there and move it around. Be sure that you also hit the undersides of the visor area, the bottom of the helmet, the edges around the bottom, just to make everything really nice and smooth, kind of all the way around. Really easy to forget those parts. All right, so we're done with the resin coating. I'm still wearing the respirator. I haven't wiped it off with the IPA yet. But you can see there is a lot of stair stepping right here up at the very, very top. And the reason that we do the resin coating, and that I think it's the fastest, is because if we look at that now horizontally, you can barely see any stair stepping. We haven't done any sanding, any primer, any Bondo, wood filler, nothing at all. This is just with 2 quick coats of resin. It took about maybe 15-20 minutes total to do 2 coats and to cure them. So next thing I want to do is I'm going to spray the whole helmet down with isopropyl alcohol, wipe it off. That just gets rid of any of the uncured resin and gives you a safe handling surface and just gets rid of any of that like tackiness that comes with resin. So we have a totally resin coated helmet now and a nice bit of mask beard. If anybody tried to maintain a beard through COVID, you know all about that. But next step is to sand this down. It is pretty smooth, but it is not perfectly smooth. There's still some imperfections. There's some areas where kind of the resin pooled and ran a little bit. You can kind of see those little ridges there. All that's just gonna have to be sanded out. And unfortunately, with 3D prop making, there's really no way to avoid sanding, so get used to it. However, with resin, it is a little harder than standard PLA or like PETG, so I do recommend picking up some sort of electric sander. It doesn't have to be an orbital. The mice sanders are super nice as well, but we're gonna start with about an 80 grit sandpaper. 60, some people do 60 grit, some people do 120, anything between like 60 and 120 for that first coat, just to knock down some of that excess resin and start that sanding, smoothing process. Oh, and a side note, definitely wear a respirator when you do this as well. Be in a well-vented area. You can open up the garage now, open up the windows, whatever, but this is gonna create a bunch of little micro pieces of resin, and you don't wanna be breathing that in. So the helmet is ready to go. I went ahead and washed it off already. Make sure after you sand, you go through, you give it a good rinse, maybe use some soap and a soft sponge just to really get all the debris off of there before you put on that first coat of primer. It'll make a world of difference in helping that primer kind of stick and adhere. So this is ready to go. I've also got the little accent pieces. I just taped them to a little piece of cardboard here so that the spray paint doesn't blow them around. I've got my homemade spray booth here. If you guys want kind of a tutorial on how to make that, or you're interested in this, it's very easy. It costs probably less than $50, I think, and it's basically just poster board, a filter, and a HVAC fan. So I can put that together sometime. Leave me a comment if you're interested in seeing how that works. But we're gonna go ahead and put the first coat of primer on everything and see where we're at. Quick side note, I'm using the Duplicolor sandable primer here. I've used the Rust-Oleum sandable primer too. They're basically the same. I don't know that this one is significantly better. I was just kind of trying it out. I think it's a few more dollars a can. I don't know that it's a few dollars better than just the Rust-Oleum stuff. I haven't noticed a huge difference, but it is nice. So. With this coat of primer, be really generous with it. It wants to go on wet. You need a nice thick layer for it to really fill in. And if you have any overruns or any drips or anything like that, you're going to be sanding it down anyway, so not a big deal. Be generous with this coat. So the first coat of primer is now dry. We still have a few little layer lines that we're gonna have to put some Bondo on, or spot putty. If you don't have that, you can use wood filler as well. It works really great. So really the resin did a great job of filling in most of these layer lines. There's just a couple spots on top that I put the putty on, kind of right there on the sides, right where it starts stair-stepping a little bit towards the top of the print. A couple little areas down the bottom. And then I always make sure to do a little bit on these bottom edges that kind of sit on the build plate, because they can get a little rough, get a little porous looking, especially if there's a support that was used there or anything like that. And you want to make sure that you don't miss this part, because anyone looking up is going to notice that. So really the biggest thing with this kind of stage of the print is the more time you put into getting things nice and smooth, filling those layer lines in, sanding it really well, even if you have to sand and prime multiple times, the better result you're going to have. Don't skip steps or don't rush in this part and then get to a basically finished product that is a little bit disappointing to yourself because, oh, if I had spent 10 more minutes with the Bondo or 10 more minutes sanding, then these things that are showing through in the final paint layer wouldn't be there anymore. It's a lot harder to go back and fix it after you've painted everything than it is to fix it in this stage. So spend some time on this, really get everything nice and smooth, exactly how you want it to be. Well, it's the next day and the helmet is ready to be painted. I sanded down the spot putty and the primer with a 220 grit sandpaper, put another layer of filler primer on top of that, and then did a wet sand with 600 grit paper, so it's nice and smooth and ready to rock. A quick recap of my whole process was just 2 layers of UV resin, and then we sanded that down with an 80 grit. Then we did a layer of filler primer on top of that, added spot putty to the obvious marks and mars that were going to be on there. Then sanded that with a 220 grit, 1 more layer of filler primer on top of that, and then a wet sand with 600 grit paper. I have a sink that I do the wet sanding in. It's super easy to do if you haven't done it. You basically, it's exactly what it sounds like. You just get the helmet wet and you get the sandpaper wet and you get in there and just sand it down like you normally would dry. What that does is it helps give it a very smooth surface. So something that's gonna be really shiny, like if you were doing, say, like a Dr. Fate helmet or something that's really shiny metallic gold, wet sanding in progression up to like a 1600 or even a 2000 grit sandpaper is a great idea because it's gonna give it that really nice polish. This, I just did 1 round of wet sanding with the 600 grit because it's not a super bright, super shiny helmet. I just wanted it to be smooth enough and have a little bit of that like metallic sheen to it without being a like mirror reflective type surface. If you don't have a sink that you can do this or a hose that you can wet sand in, go to the hardware store, grab a big 5-gallon empty paint bucket, fill it halfway up with water, and you can wet sand with that. Just dip the helmet or the part in, sand it, dip it in to rinse it, and just keep going back and forth with that. Super easy way to kind of work around not having a utility sink. For paints, I'm going to go with the first layer. We're going to hit it with the Rust-Oleum. This is just a flat black. It's a very dark helmet pretty much all the way around. And so this will give us a very, very nice base coat there. And especially with the fact that the helmet is pretty much a matte black through this kind of rim mohawk type area, and then the front through here is a matte black, and then I believe even up through here, this kind of like visor border area is all kind of a matte black on there. So that'll give us a really good base coat for everything else while also coloring the appropriate shade for the areas that need it too. And then the other color I'm going to use is this. I haven't tried this yet, but it's a metallic dark metal. It's a Krylon metallic dark metal. We'll see how this works. The helmet itself is not, if you look at all the reference images, it's not completely black. So I wanted almost like a gunmetal type finish to it with a little bit of that metallic sheen without being too bright, but without being completely black. If you don't want to do this and you have black laying around, you could absolutely do this with like a flat black for the mohawk and the visor part here, and then a like satin black for everything else. We'd be totally fine. I'm just going to give it a little more bit of a metallic look, so we're gonna go with this here. And then for the yellow paint, I have this old can of Montana black that I use for a Boba Fett helmet for the kill stripes on the side of it. It's technically a melon yellow, but it's gonna be close enough for me. I'm not too worried about it. So that's what we're gonna do for the yellow accent mark on the helmet. On the first coat here, you start with kind of a light to medium dusting, and then you go back in and fill in the blanks. You don't want to go too heavy because you don't want to cause runs that you're gonna have to sand back down later. Here you can see that everything's been taped off, and we're just going in and filling in everything that's not supposed to be that matte black while preserving the face visor and the mohawk. All right, so I just finished, I put on the coat of this this Krylon metallic dark metal paint, and it is not the move. This is very silvery. It's not nearly as dark as I had hoped it was gonna be. It's a beautiful paint, it looks really good, and it covered really great. It's just not gonna be the paint for this project. So I went and picked up a black satin, and I'm gonna go over this with a black satin. At this point, I've covered all the dark gray metal parts with the black satin, and I've retaped the helmet to paint those yellow accent marks. I chose to go with the 2 thick lines in the vents, and then the 1 big thick line on the left side of the helmet. So the helmet is finally painted. I had some issues with the paint on these little side vent pieces where it kind of orange peeled up pretty good. I don't know why it did it. It's just one of those things that happens sometimes. It could have been the humidity, it could have been the temperature, it could have been the paint, could have been it was dust on there. I have no idea why, but it orange peeled up on both of the side vents, so I had to wait for that to dry, which takes like 14-15 hours, because then you have to sand it back down to get a smoother coat of paint on it. You can kind of see here on this side, right through here, there's still a little bit of that orange peeling on there, but you know, this is a HELLDIVERS helmet. We go down and we're fighting bugs with flamethrowers, so this is a little blowback from that flamethrower that melted that paint up in my lore for this helmet. You know, I could sand this whole thing back down and get it perfect again. You have to decide, is that worth your time? For me, not really. We're gonna battle damage this. Pro tip, anything that gets messed up during the way that's kind of a small easy fix, you just battle damage over it and it looks good in the end. So this is looking pretty good to where I want it to be. A couple other things we have to paint. I have to put the skulls on the side. I haven't quite decided how I'm gonna do that yet. I think I'm going to try to use a stencil technique. Just print them out on a piece of paper, cut them out, slap it on there, and paint it. The only issue with that is that thin printer paper is going to want to kind of peel or kind of roll up a little bit when it gets wet. So I'm gonna have to do it light enough to not do that, but also heavy enough so that the skull actually sits on there. That's my plan for now. Ideally, if you have like a cry-cut, like vinyl sticker maker thing, just make a vinyl sticker, slap that on there, clear coat over it. That'll be way easier. I don't have that, so I'm gonna go with the stencil. We'll see how it works. Here you can see I've taped off everything except for a little window to paint the skull on. I printed out 2 different sizes of skulls. I chose the smaller one because the big one was way too big. The small one might be just a little bit too small, but it's good enough. We'll put it on there and see what it looks like. The skulls are painted on. It came out better than expected. It's not perfect. This one will need a little bit of cleanup with just a white brush and some acrylic. And then this one actually came out pretty nice. I'll have to go in by hand with a brush and manually paint the little eyes, which are not going to be perfect circles, but again, battle damage, right? And then I got to paint the little nose piece on there too. So I'll just do those manually with some black acrylic paint, and then it's just a matter of adding some little metal areas where the paint's been scratched off from battle damage and giving it a nice black wash, gluing in the visor, and we're pretty much done. All right, we got the skulls on there. We got the eyes painted. They look like skulls. They're not perfect. You know, like I said, a vinyl sticker. A decal would be way easier to do. I didn't have that, so we made do. Next is what I'm going to do is kind of add some battle damage, some paint chipping that kind of exposes the underlying metal. The way that I do that, there's several ways to do this. If you have like a silver acrylic paint, you can do that. I just use some like chrome or silver spray paint that I have laying around. Just kind of depends on what's available to me. And I just use like a piece of cardboard and I just spray this onto there. And then with my dedicated weathering brush, I just dip it into that and then I go around and make those little chips. It usually turns out pretty well. After that we black wash, clear coat, and then we'll glue in the visor. When adding this type of paint chipped style battle damage, it's really important to think about how a helmet would actually be used in the field. It's going to be these corners, these areas that stick out a lot that are going to be most often taking any blows or getting scraped when you're diving around, things like that. So a lot of the chipping will happen on these really sharp, strong edges. And then I'll go back later and I'll add some basic like paint chips, like, you know, if shrapnel was flying or debris were flying that would hit the more broad side of the helmet. But most of this style of battle damage is happening along the edges. So now that the finish is damaged, we got those little paint chips on there, but this doesn't really complete the battle damage because it still looks like a new helmet with just paint chips. So the next thing we got to do is do a black wash, and that's what's going to give it that kind of greasy, grimy, field-used look. And to do that, you just take some water and some acrylic black paint. I use a cup. Just put it in a cup, stir it around. You're going to go over it multiple times with different layers. Let it sit for 10 to 30 seconds depending on your dilution, and then you wipe it off with a paper towel. And you just kind of scuff at it, wipe it off with a paper towel. That's going to kind of tint everything a nice dark black and look like there's oil in there. And naturally, it's going to settle into a lot of these like little grooves down in here, and these little gaps and crevices, and get darker kind of towards the deeper areas and stay lighter on the areas that would get brushed up more. My black wash is done here. You can see it's pretty quick to do. It doesn't take a lot. You're just kind of building up those layers, and now we have that kind of grimy look in there. The light might be a little too bright there, but you can kind of see there's some like looks like oil or dirt or whatever. Now, I mean, black washing a black helmet, you're not going to get a lot of the depth that you do if you black wash, say, like a Daredevil helmet that's red or an Iron Man helmet that's red and gold, right? But you can see it really well in these kind of vents where it kind of settles into the bottom there, just like dirt or wet mud would, and then along the yellow striping as well, some of it over the skulls. And it kind of helps to dim down some of those paint chips so that it doesn't look like a new helmet with just chipped paint, right? Kind of gives it that better, more field used look. You could go back and do a brown wash with this, same thing, you just use brown paint instead of black and give it that kind of different dirt type look. But again, it's a really dark helmet. It's not gonna stand out hugely. I'm happy with the way this looks, so I'm just gonna wait for it to dry and we're gonna clear coat it and put the visor in. All right, helmet has been clear coated. It is looking pretty good. Ready to put the visor in. I do this a little bit different. If you're going to actually just order the visor, because it does technically have like a little vacuum formed ledge on there. I believe Galactic Armory is selling the actual vacuum formed visors. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't have a vacuum former, so I'm gonna do this the way I would do like a Mandalorian visor. And the way that I do that is with this here. This is just acetate plastic. This is, I believe, 4 mil MIL is the thickness of this, which makes it the same thickness as like the Hobart welding mask shields that a lot of people will use for the T-visors in the Mandalorian helmets. And so I get that instead. You get a 5-pack of these for like 12 bucks, and then you just get some window tint of whatever grade you want. This is limo tint, and just like you would tint a car window or anything, you just put it on. It's just soap water, and you just kind of lay it on. It sticks, it adheres really well. It's a lot cheaper. I mean, I can get 2 T-visors out of one of these for $2 as opposed to, you know, $10 for a Hobart visor. So this is the way I do it. And just like that, we are all done. The helmet is totally finished. It looks pretty good. My camera was turned off when I was recording the visor. The battery ran out. So I didn't get to put that in there, but really all I do for this is I take a sheet of printer paper or notebook paper. I just put it in the inside of the helmet and kind of hold it so it blocks out this area from the inside. I take a Sharpie or a marker and I just trace all the way around the outside, through the outside of the helmet. And then that gives me a good model of what a perfectly fitting visor would do. I cut that out, but I leave about a 1/2 inch extra width from where I traced to where I'm actually cutting out. And then I just put that down on my my visor template, my plastic, and I cut that out, and we end up with something that looks a lot like that. Enough space on there to go around, enough space that you need to, if you need to trim it off, you can, and a good area for the glue to adhere to without being visible in the visor as well. So that's what it looks like hot glued in. I added some pads in there for a little more snug of a fit. And so yeah, that's it. I played the game a little bit last night and I noticed that my skulls are a little bit off. They're about 10% smaller than they should be, and they should really be placed right about here instead of kind of up here. So I messed that up just a touch. Not a big deal. I'm not too worried about it. Just like me, this looks pretty good from far away. So we'll keep it as it is. If I get a wild hair one day, maybe I'll go and fix that. So I'm happy with it. It fits perfectly. We're ready to rock. Don't mind the beard. It's cosplay is not beard friendly, but that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Helldivers. See you in there.